Hi, I'm TravelerFarlander. I've been in TTRPGs for most of my life, since I was about 12. I have been in IT for over 20 years, specializing in virtualization and cloud technologies, which is the kind of thing that directly talks about what we're here to do today.
And I'm Strike Redkite. I have also been in TTRPGs for most of my life, and I work in logistics and technology for a company that doesn't have anything to do with gaming or really the technology thereof. But I've been playing video games since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, and people still used that phrase to denote small person. So I've got at least a little bit of experience in this sort of thing, and I'm looking forward to getting into some of this because I think, well, video gamers are quite experienced with the idea of games as a service, live service games, however you want to phrase it. That is a fairly alien concept to a lot of people who, until probably the last 5 years or so, did everything in pen and paper.
And then everybody else who's watching knows me. I'm a music kid. I don't really have too much of a footing in TTRPG like these guys do. It's only been about the past 10 years or so that I've gotten into it. But I'll be here to try and put as much input in as games as a service as I can because I play a lot of games that are service style games. So hopefully it transfers over to knowledge about the TTRPG space, but we'll see.
What we're here to do. Just connect the dots.
So speaking of those dots, we are recording this just after some news had come out and some more information has come out. But this topic has been kind of bubbling in mine and Trav's head for probably at least a good year now. Especially since the OGL, we'll call it a fiasco. That's basically what it was. All went down, and one of the things that was brought up was the idea of moving a lot of Dungeons and Dragons content and rules and such to D&D Beyond, and that has some advantages to it, but it also has a lot of disadvantages to it as well. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure we were talking about and were sure that we could provide some insight on is, as folks who have lived through multiple digital revolutions of media and seen just how some of these things have happened, it is notable how a lot of these sorts of patterns recur themselves and the kinds of pitfalls you can fall into really easily and then end up kind of up a creek in many cases. So we wanted to make sure that there was some opportunity for us to sort of talk about what all is going on with that.
Yeah. TTRPG gamers in particular, as opposed to video gamers, are used to physical media. It's what we've been around for the longest time. In terms of the books for the games, miniatures, maps, pen and paper RPG used to be, in fact, what you called things before we were started calling them tabletop RPGs as opposed to computer RPGs. And then some of us have gotten used to PDFs of books instead of the physical books. And that's not really what we're here to talk about, because when you own a PDF, okay, you still own the book. You've still got the text. You can do with it what you want. It's just bits and bytes instead of paper and ink.
At least thus far, anyway, with the digital rights management we've got so far.
So far. DRM-free PDFs mean, yes, you don't have to deal with digital rights management where you've got to prove you own the book or have the rights to look at the book, and that becomes important every time you try to open the book. I mean, when you own a physical book, there is no DRM. You open the cover, you're done. You own the book.
You can pry
When
it
you've
out of
got-
my cold, dead hands.
Exactly. When you've got a DRM-free PDF, there's no check. If you have the file, if you try to open the file opens. There's no test. There's no verification or authentication and authorization check. Auth-in and auth-ex is what the industry calls this. But that's not games as a service. And this is the thing that a lot of TTRPG gamers, hearing about the transition to something like D&D being a game as a service, maybe don't see the pitfalls of. There are positives and negatives to it. We want to make sure that everyone's aware of the negatives, because everybody's too quick to sell you on the positives without telling you what all you're getting into.
Yeah, you're always going to hear plenty of the positives, and we'll certainly touch on those too, just so that we're not, a complete one-sided thing. But it's definitely something that has some pitfalls that aren't always easy to spot. Now, luckily for us, the news continues to give us perfect and shining examples of some of those pitfalls. For those who are at all familiar with the anime space, you may have heard of Crunchyroll. You may also have heard of Funimation. Funimation, for a long time, in addition to its streaming catalog, offered the ability to purchase titles, sort of like if you have ever used Amazon Prime's Video for videos that aren't necessarily included in your subscription, you can purchase them. Now, what you are purchasing is a license to then stream it, and you don't get a DVD, you don't get a copy yourself, you have a license to do so. That means that there are terms and conditions to your use of that license that, let's face it, most of us never read, because admittedly, for most of us, it's never really likely to come up. But something that is in almost all of those licenses will be clauses that allow the rights holder, Funimation, Crunchyroll, Wizards of the Coast, whomever, to adjust or terminate access to that license for a variety of reasons. In this case, in the anime world, Crunchyroll has bought out Funimation. And while they are bringing the streaming catalog over, they are not going to continue to support the purchased licensed copies that Funimation owners had. And as a result, if you spent $20 for a copy of your favorite anime on Funimation, as of April 1st, sucks to be you. Hope it's in the streaming catalog, because if it's not, you may not have access to it anymore.
Your lease has been terminated.
Yeah, your lease has been terminated. And this is the same sort of thing that can happen with any kind of media with that sort of digital rights management, where you are not even necessarily having a local copy, although you can have DRM on local copies as well. But especially for anything that's held in the cloud, say D&D Beyond style, all of that is held on servers that you don't have direct access to. And your license permits you to view and access this information while that license is valid. But once they turn that off, you're SOL. Now, one of the concerns of this is inevitably, well, what happens if the company goes under? You will also almost certainly be SOL. That's considerably less likely in the case of Wizards of the Coast, certainly. But Wizards of the Coast is far from the only company that is looking at bringing TTRPGs into the games as a service sort of space. There are a number of services, Demiplane, Roll20, where they are looking to sort of fulfill that role. And it's important to remember that, no company, unless they're a bank, is immune to the downfalls of how the market works.
Even the banks. Before we dive too deeply into any individual examples, we've set the stage for that, but let's make sure everybody's on the same page. When we talk about something as a service in the computing world, it means basically your workload is happening on someone else's servers. The main things you get out of that are it's easier to scale up, it's easier to grow. You don't have to, you're not necessarily responsible for the maintenance. You're not necessarily responsible for ensuring that everything that's supposed to happen at a physical data center to support those servers happens. That's on the person who's providing you the service as a producer or as an application runner so that they handle all that for you. You can concentrate on what's important. You also don't have to pay for the servers. You don't own the servers. That's the as a service part more than anything. Ownership. You don't own what you're paying for. You are leasing what you're paying for. Are you buying time on their servers? That's an infrastructure as a service. Are you buying access to software that they run for you and all you have to do is use the software? That's software as a service. This is where kind of D&D Beyond fit starts coming in, software as a service. But with what they were initially calling One D&D initiative a couple of years ago, WotC signaled that they were moving towards something that is being called games as a service. If you're an MMO player, you're already familiar with games as a service, a live service game. World of Warcraft. You don't own World of Warcraft when you buy it. You buy access to log in, and you subscribe to do so. It's not a one-time purchase. So if you no longer subscribe, you no longer get to log in, and any money you've spent on it, well, that was just a subscription. You don't get anything else out of it. You don't own anything you created there. It's just gone.
You can't run that
fun.
software on its own without the back end that's coming from it. And to be fair, there are advantages to the as a service model. The economies of scale winds up kicking in, and you have what is likely a much better experience than you might have if you were paying for a server yourself, because you and 45 million of your closest friends are all ponying up your $15 a month for your WoW subscription. And that allows Blizzard to buy very nice servers and a very good server farm and all of those things so that the game runs better. If me and Trav and Mickey were just ponying up for a server somewhere, we'd be cobbling it together out of parts, and it would probably work some of the time, we hope. It's a very different ballgame when you can have the kind of scale of, we have millions of subscribers, so we have servers that can handle millions of subscribers using it.
With something like D&D Beyond, which is, again, a service offering, in this case, software as a service, or Roll20, again, software as a service for the virtual tabletop, their marketplace in particular. When you buy something on there, you're not buying the book. You're not going to be able to download the book that you've purchased. What you've done is you've spent money that says, I want to be able to access this data on this service for the lifetime of the service. And that's basically what you get. It's really just database access that you can use. So now you can use that information that's in that book on character sheets, which are also software. You can use it in the virtual tabletop, software, but you aren't getting a copy of the book mailed to you. You know, there are now starting to be physical bundles, then, digital physical bundles. That was a first-time offering from WotC with the release of the first Dragonlance book in 30-something years. They did that because one of the biggest complaints about D&D Beyond for the longest time was that very question of ownership. You couldn't download the PDF copy of the book. And their argument was, when it was originally created by Curse Gaming and then later owned by Fandom, remember, WotC only purchased D&D Beyond in the last 2 years. They didn't create it. But when it first came around as a subcontractor, basically providing that service for WotC, so they didn't have to do it, they said that their contract with WotC didn't allow them to sell you a copy of the book. Other companies said, well, we'll let you get a PDF copy if you buy the physical book at a friendly local game store, or from us, we'll just do something like put a code in the book. When the counter argument was, well, okay, what stops somebody from just taking the code out of the book and redeeming the code and stealing your PDF? Which is one of the arguments that WotC made for the longest time about not doing it. So they finally came up with a way where, yeah, you can have a physical copy of the book as long as you buy it from us and as long as it's part of a digital bundle with D&D Beyond. D&D Beyond was the primary product they were trying to sell you there, not the book. The book was basically an add-on.
And it is important to realize that, well, obviously, these sorts of licenses, these sorts of leases get terminated for cause for all sorts of things. They can also be terminated, in many cases, for no cause. Even it is not unlike the right to work state clauses. You might decide that you want to become a vocal opponent of what Wizards of the Coast is doing with whatever. Okay, but they may decide that you're not going to be a D&D Beyond user anymore. They're going to terminate that account. You spent $400 on books in that account? That's a real shame.
You can't access it anymore. It's going to be something that they base on the terms of service and the end user license agreements. If you don't read those things, you don't know what your rights are for what you're expecting to get back for spending money on that service. And keep in mind what the terms of service or end user license agreements say when you originally agree to them is not necessarily what they say today. How many times have you seen mail that you didn't want, email that you didn't really care to have, about a service saying, oh, we've updated the terms of service and we're required to tell you that. Here it is, go read it. Or don't, that's on you. But
You have been notified.
Today. Yep.
That is all that we need to do.
They have followed their obligations to the letter, and that's all they're ever going to do. But if you don't know what's in the EULA or the TOS, you don't know what rights you have. Can they terminate you at any time for denigrating the product publicly? Maybe. Certain companies have absolutely done that to their customers. Do you own any of the characters you create using D&D Beyond? Maybe. Are they allowed, is WotC allowed to use them, to use those character designs and the information you have entered in them for any of their marketing material? Maybe. You think they couldn't do that, and yet companies have been caught doing exactly that with user-generated content, and it's entirely agreed to in the EULA and the terms of service.
The thing to note here is, until you have really knocked out the, okay, this is what the EULA specifically says. This is what the terms of service specifically say. And honestly, for most of us, gone over it with a lawyer, it's awfully difficult to figure out how to handle that. It may seem like you have some rights, or maybe Wizards has some rights, or who knows. The difficulty of these sorts of agreements to read is inherent and a purpose. That's kind of a goal in many cases, because they're doing it on purpose. If it's extremely difficult to understand, most of us will do what we've been doing with EULAs and terms of service since basically the dawn of the internet. Scroll to bottom, click agree, move on. because
They're counting on.
I don't have time to read 50 plus pages. And if you're telling me that you do, great, by all means. But I will bet money that you probably don't read it on every service you use, every social media platform you log into, every application you run. It sounds exhausting.
And of course, if you don't agree to use it, you don't get to use the service. That's one of the biggest incentives they have to get you to just hit agree and move on. Now, I don't want to make out like these are always entirely negative. The user experience for something that's done as a service is not always a bad thing. There are advantages to do it, or else it wouldn't exist. It never would have caught on. You don't, for instance, have to worry if your copy of a book gets eaten by your dog, or gets lost, or gets thrown in the trash by your mother, who believes still in the satanic panic from 30 years ago. Because you've purchased it online, you've got a PDF library, maybe over at TravelerFarlander or someplace like that. As long as you can access D&D Beyond, you can still read the book. Now, of course, you do have to have internet access to do that because there's no offline version of it. You can download the book, but you still got to be able to authenticate that you have the right to do it, to read it in the D&D Beyond app. But again, as long as they're up and running, and as long as you don't violate the terms of service, you can continue to read the book. And a physical copy being destroyed doesn't really ruin anything for you. You don't have to go buy it again for that reason. Then again, if they wanted to change the book, they can, and they will, and they have already done so. For the longest time, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, it is one of the advantages and disadvantages. On the one hand, your book you don't have to carry around a binder of printed out pages of errata that have followed gamers since the beginning of time, in which, okay, well, I know that the book says that this is how this works, but we figured out that is not how that's supposed to work. So instead, it's going to work this way. Okay,
well, I've got pages from this magazine a few years later where they updated that, and I copied that out and put it in here. So you just have to remember or mark up the book. That was how errata used to be sent to us in the days before the internet. It was newsletters and magazines. Then we got the internet, and hey, you can just print them out. But now, with live service books, they can literally just update the text in the database, and the next time you reload that page, the rules are different. Did you notice that the rules were different? Hope so.
I hope it wasn't really important that you were using the previous version of the rules.
Right, because those may not be available to you anymore if you don't have it printed out somewhere or a physical copy of the book. And this is the advantage and disadvantage again, is that they can and will update the books for whatever reason they want. They just may have decided, you know what, we don't like how that came across, we're going to change it. Is that a bad thing? 100% of the time, no. Sometimes they make pretty big gaffes and do things that are highly inappropriate or insensitive, and they decide, oh, no, that shouldn't have passed editing. We're going to fix that. Hold on a minute. Come back tomorrow. This will not be a problem anymore. We promise. Those of you who purchased the Spelljammer box from D&D Beyond are probably pretty aware of an example of that case. And it's not like they can just turn the book off if you have it at home. I've got copies of the first edition AD&D that I've had since I was 12. They still work. They're not getting updates, but they still work. Stryk, coming from second edition, same deal.
Yep.
The books still work.
But for an example, imagine if you are old enough to remember 3rd edition, eventually Wizards printed D&D 3.5, and it changed quite a bit. Now, we're not going to get into the argument of did it improve things or not. That has been endlessly regurgitated over message boards for decades now. But to give an example, in 3.0, in the original book, the haste spell, if you cast it on, say, yourself as a wizard, would allow you to cast 2 spells on successive turns because you were hasted. When 3.5 rolled around, they realized that that was madness and that this was not, in fact, Sparta, and we were not going to be doing that anymore. And so instead, you can get an extra weapon attack. You want to whack them with your quarterstaff, you go right ahead. But you are not casting 2 fireballs around anymore. That was ridiculous.
You think the 2 spells around argument is contentious in 5th edition?
Yeah,
Oh boy.
No kidding. Imagine having it for about 10 minutes straight. But there were plenty of people when that change came around that didn't like that change. Both DMs and players alike.
Wizard
and
players,
instead, mostly players. I was one of them. I was playing a Necromancer Red Wizard of Thay. I was very miffed that I couldn't enervate 2 things at once anymore. And I tried to convince my DM, without success, probably for the best, to let me use the old rules. We had the book. It was right there. It said I could do it. Well, we've updated. Now imagine that instead of holding up the old book where it told you how that worked, you instead held up a book where the only text was the new rules. For better or for worse.
That is what a live service game means. They can and will update the game as they see fit. And if you don't like that change, this is also something that the One D&D initiative, and I know they're not really called that anymore, but this is one of the things that they've talked about since the beginning. They don't want to talk about it as a new edition because it's not to them a new edition. It's a update. It is incorporating the changes that they've made over the last 10 years since the original 5th edition came out in 2014. It's incorporating Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. It's incorporating Monsters of the Multiverse. It's incorporating the Xanathar's Guide to Everything. They want those changes that they've made and that they've decided are better for the game and for the community overall to be the game officially, with no more question, no more worry that not everyone's using it, not everyone's using the same game, etc. And they've found a way to do that and future-proof that whole question and not have the edition wars of the past where, oh, well, I like 4th edition better. I like 3rd edition better. No more editions. No. We're all just going to play D&D. It's going to be one D&D from now on.
These are the rules. See?
Mm-hmm.
They've always been the rules. There is no war in Ba Sing Se.
We've always been at war with East Asia. There's something to that. There have been arguments in organized play, the Adventures League. The same thing crops up in other games, organized play leagues as well. That, well, if there's been a change, which one are we using? Does it apply to us yet? There's a staggered time period of it. There's no more question about that. But there's also now not necessarily an ability to say, well, we don't really like this new stuff. We're just going to go play the old thing. Now, of course, you can always house rule. But again, now you're having to remember that you've got a house rule. It's back to printed out errata sheets. And of course, there are other games. Good gods, there are other games. We are in a golden age of other games to play, especially since the mess with the OGL, showed every other company that isn't WotC that wanted to have fantasy roleplay products out there that maybe they couldn't trust WotC to own the eternal terms of service. Because that's what the OGL is. It's a terms of service document that they always said would never change, and then they changed it. This is a really good example of, well, yeah, but the terms of service I signed up for say that this is what I get. That's what they said at the time. That's not what they say anymore. And you have no recourse because they own the terms of service.
It's their IP, and at a certain point, if they want to go ahead and pull that, they can.
Worst case scenario on any service offering is they simply decide to stop the service. There's plenty of precedent for that, not just in the modern day. 4th edition D&D had a tool set online, one of the first digital tool sets offered for a tabletop role-playing game. The D&D character tools were available from the Wizards website. You could go, you could create characters, you could create encounters. They were pretty groundbreaking for the day. And it was running on WotC servers. And then they created 5th edition. And a year or two later decided, well, this is 4th edition. We don't support 4th edition anymore. We're going to go ahead and close this. I hope you didn't have anything up here that you didn't want to save off or keep ever, because you can't use it anymore. It's gone. And it was gone. Within the last couple of weeks, in the writing world, this exact scenario has played out in a horrifying way. The messenger decided, we're going to shut down services. We're not profitable. We've decided we can't keep doing this. Yeah, we're done. All of you who've been using our service to publish your work for the internet and get seen and share ad revenue, yeah, we're done. And we're going to turn the servers off now, within about 2 hours of the original announcement. No time given for any of the authors who'd been using the messenger to go archive their software, archive their writings, and show it as part of their portfolio. These are dead links now. Anywhere they'd posted a link to the work they had put there, just hits a 404 now. Sorry. And they have no recourse because they posted that there on the messenger, and the messenger decided to stop the service. That's what as a service means. Again, you own nothing.
One thing that is important to bear in mind with all of these moves to games as a service, to live service gaming, especially when it comes to TTRPGs and everything else, is it is important to remember to try, whenever possible, to keep a copy of the work that you are doing available for yourself, separate from the servers you're putting it on. D&D Beyond has an extensive section for homebrew. It's wonderful. It's really nice to be able to either go ahead and homebrew a subclass for a character and just put it right in there, and then I don't have to worry about what do they put on their sheet in the interim, and how do we remember that this is actually this, and I can do it all in D&D Beyond, which is wonderful. It makes it much more accessible. But if my only copy is in D&D Beyond, if I don't have a copy of that rule saved locally somewhere in a Word document or a notepad file or something, what happens if D&D Beyond shuts down tomorrow or decides that my homebrew was derivative and deletes it?
Or just decides you violated the TOS, and guess what? You can't access it anymore.
Or And these, of course, are the more malicious sorts of feelings, but what if there's a glitch? Like, these are computer systems that are running pretty much 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with minimal downtime for maintenance. Stuff happens. If D&D Beyond glitches and the data that is my homebrew corrupts, well, then what happens?
What if they get hacked?
What if they get hacked? What if you get hacked?
Stryk and I are both members of a particular Discord server. And a couple of weeks ago, that server was infiltrated by someone who figured out a way to give themselves admin rights and started deleting whole channels, kicking off half the user base before countermeasures kicked in and stopped the thing in its tracks. But the damage was done. People had to be reinvited. Their histories were lost. Whole channels were lost.
All of the discussions that happened are gone.
Gone. And you think that can't happen to something the size of D&D Beyond. It happens to international banks. It happens to insurance companies. It happens to manufacturing concerns. It happens to defense contractors. You think it's going to happen to D&D Beyond?
If hospital systems can be shut down thanks to ransomware because somebody opened an email link that they shouldn't have, trust me when I tell you that someone, I am virtually certain, someone at Hasbro can and will open an email and click on a link they shouldn't, and all hell will break loose. And that's just assuming that it's happening on their end. It is not out of the realm of possibility for yourself to be compromised in some way. We live in a really dangerous internet era in which a lot of people feel like the systems that they run, antivirus and the like, just make them immune to any sort of negative consequences to browsing the internet. And that's not how that works. That has never been how that works. It's like wearing body armor while walking through a war zone. You are probably more protected than the guy who's got a t-shirt and jeans on, but it doesn't make you immune to any damage. It just means that you are probably less likely to suffer those negative consequences.
Along the lines of we live in a system, there's also just the case of, okay, WotC wants to keep D&D Beyond available and accessible to you no matter what. It's part of their identity now. Hasbro doesn't necessarily care, and Hasbro's in charge.
Yep.
The rumors were flying last week that Hasbro had decided, you know what? We need to make some money real quick. Let's sell D&D. We'll sell it to a company that does not have any history with this product, and maybe, who cares what they do with it? It'll be their problem then. And so will you, the under-monetized user base that annoys Hasbro executives every damn day. What if they sold it? That turned out not to be true this time, but what if they sold it? WotC wouldn't have a choice. WotC does not have a say at that point. WotC is the product they're selling at that point as much as anything. And if another company decides they don't want to keep the service online, or they want to raise prices, or they want to cut off the user base, you have no recourse.
And that's just assuming those sorts of things. There's also the fun times of, we live in a global economy now. And one of the biggest user bases and biggest markets for a whole lot of IP is China. For anybody who is still living under a rock, there are a lot stricter rules about what you can and cannot do online, in media, and so on in China versus the Western world. That is as neutral a way I can phrase that as possible. There have
I
been...
mean, you look at MiHoYo, a company that's based in China themselves, who constantly have to roll back things that they do because the government goes, well, actually, you can't do that. And so they've got 3 big games that they're constantly having to refund people for, or, you know, change. They're one of the companies who legally, if they make a nerf or a buff to a character, must then compensate the player base who uses that character for said nerf and or buff to the character. Because that's the way that the Chinese law works, is if you're making an adjustment to a character that's already been released, and it would otherwise impact the play done by that character, you have to give recompense to the people who are using it or don't use it if you're buffing it.
Hey, D&D players, you don't like how Warlock works today? Wait until somebody in China decides that they don't like the way that Warlocks work tomorrow. That's going to kick in.
there's all sorts of censorship and stuff that goes on in media, even in situations where that isn't something that is owned by those companies or anything else. To appeal to that audience, there are changes that get made. There are all sorts of examples in this in media. We're not going to go over all of them by any stretch of the imagination. The MiHoYo games are a great example. But in addition to just, we have to compensate people when we make changes, imagine the countless ideas that either never get voiced or die on the table in the boardroom because, well, that would never be okay over here. Or that's not something that we can do here.
Or even somebody in the room just doesn't know and doesn't care that they don't know. And just says, I don't see how that would work. So no. I'm going to assume that wouldn't work for these straw man audience that I've made up in my head. And whether or not those people are real, or whether or not people actually do this, I don't. So I don't see how anyone else could. If you've never talked to a vice president about IT, and that person is in sales, you do not know how bad it can get.
It is remarkable how often people who do not really have a good grasp or understanding of what is going on are the ones making the final decisions about it. And if that is detrimental to you, yeah, that's how that goes. So the shift to digital brings with it these sorts of fears. One thing to keep an eye out for as these continue to move and change and the landscape goes is, at some point, sooner or later, Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast are going to have to grapple with the truth that much of the TTRPG industry has had to grapple with before, and nobody has really quite figured out how to solve, which is that printing books is a money sink. It's not particularly profitable ever.
It's expensive. It's gotten more expensive.
It is expensive. It has gotten more expensive. Supply chain has made it harder. It's also gotten more expensive as people's tastes have changed. Long gone are a couple of hastily scrawled sketches in the margins and call that the art budget.
Everything's got to be beautiful. Look at what they've been soliciting for the updated art in the next editions, the next printings of the 2024 Player's Handbook for Dungeons and Dragons. They have talked so much about every subclass has art now. We've added more art here, more art there. Look at the quality of this art. And it's great for the end user until you think about the money that costs. I don't even want to get into the subject of how much of it might be AI generated art. Right, and the impact that has on artists. That's a whole other topic. But let's, just as an example of this, let's look at one of the biggest competitors to the Dungeons and Dragons market share, Pathfinder, Paizo, the publishers of Pathfinder and Starfinder. Just in the last 6 months, they've had to go to the user base and explain, okay, here's how our books are going to go up in price and why. They took an unusual step of being very transparent. Unusual in the industry, not unusual for Paizo, but they talked to everyone. They let everyone know, okay, here's the deal. It's gotten more expensive for materials, more expensive for the labor to get done, and more expensive to ship it back over from the only places in the world that it's even affordable to print those in the first place. This all has an effect on the price that we can't avoid and stay in business, so we're raising the prices. That's going to keep happening. It's not going to suddenly get cheaper, because nothing gets cheaper unless something makes it get cheaper.
Mm-hmm. So we can expect that at some point, sooner or later, the inevitable axe is going to fall. Maybe it's when D&D Beyond passes a certain number of active users. Maybe it's with the printing that is beyond this next one. Who knows? But at some point, you're going to hear Wizards of the Coast announce that they're going to an all digital format. And there's going to be lots of great reasons why this is beneficial for everyone. It's going to be green. It's going to be better for the environment. We're not going to be cutting down trees to make books anymore. It's going to be faster. Instead of having to wait the extra 6 months for the printer and all of that stuff happening, you're going to get that book right away. All of the things we've talked about as games as a service. You no longer have to keep track of errata. It's going to be updated for you. All you have to do is log right in.
As long as you've got an internet connection.
And as long as you've got an internet connection. And we're going to make it available offline for you in the app. Like, as long as you've logged into the app on the internet once in the last week, 30 days, whatever, you're good. It's fine. We're understanding of that sort of thing.
You'll have to log in again eventually because security.
Right. And of course, D&D Beyond already makes it relatively easy to share a copy of your book with your friends, the way that, frankly, we've been doing since the beginning of this sort of thing. When I first started playing, the books literally had shares. You would write your name and how many shares of the book you had paid for, so that there were a couple of copies at the table and you could, own 1/6 of a player's handbook or whatever, because they were expensive and we were young and we didn't have the money to just go out and buy a full set of these books. Plus, especially for games like Dungeons and Dragons, but even, other games, it's not just, you can't just do the player's handbook. You better also make sure that somebody's got a DMG. Nobody has a monster manual. Like, it's not just one $40, $50, $60, $70 book. It's 3. Oh, well, unless you wanted to play an artificer, then it's 4.
And of course,
or if you wanted those extra spells in Tasha's.
Yeah, then it's 5.
Yeah, that's
maybe
5.
But maybe we're going to bring everything together under one book, and that won't be a problem anymore, as long as you buy the book again. And maybe we make you a subscriber of it. But of course, you can share the content with the other people at your virtual table, as long as someone pays the subscription fee that makes that feature available every month.
And that subscription fee will be a reasonable, small cost that basically just covers the server costs.
Sure.
Like, we're not making money on such a thing. Of course not. Perish the
$4.99 a month for now. Oh, now it's going to be $8.99 a month. We added a couple of features. That's fair.
Now you're getting a whole. Now you don't need to have a subscription to Roll20 and D&D Beyond. You can do your battle map in D&D Beyond.
Do it all here in the single walled garden that is D&D Beyond, with virtual maps, virtual 3D spaces, virtual miniatures that you buy as part of a bundle, with the access to the book for as long as the service is around, and you keep paying a subscription fee. But that'll be fine, right? Oh, we've decided, by the way, we're going to make it even easier for everyone to log on. We're going to reduce the subscription fee and then support it with ads. But that's fine. You'll barely notice them.
Oh, you don't have the $8.99 a month to subscribe anymore? Well, don't worry. We're adding a new special tier that's only $5 a month. There are some ads on there, but that's fine. It's not a big deal. You see ads all the time. Nobody cares. It's
more ads
fine.
than the $8 level, sure. But it's less ads than the $5 level. Come on. That's fair, right? We got to make money somehow, and more than last quarter. If you are listening to us rant about this and saying, okay, now you've gone beyond, you've jumped the shark, the pail, this is all nonsense, this will never happen. In the prior 2 weeks to the recording of this video, WotC's done two things of note on this very topic. One, they let go the senior specialists on the team devoted to making sure that printing and publishing happens in a timely way and at a good cost for them. They let those people go. They've also solicited for a senior digital rules specialist. If you'd like to work for them and let them get even more into making sure that the rules work in a digital format, maybe you should go look at their jobs page, because they're doubling down on that right now.
And in case you think that the rest of this is baseless, extrapolation and could never happen, have you had a Netflix subscription recently? Because none of what we're talking about is particularly alien to any of a dozen other services that many of us use on a regular basis. This is exactly the pattern that these corporations are going to use. And that isn't to say that they're not providing value for the money. It is notable, though, to see just where that value is coming from and what you are giving up in exchange for it. It is altogether too easy to assume that everything is just going to be the way it is and it's never going to change, or if it goes up, that's only reasonable, it's okay. These are more than just, oh well, I mean, obviously they have to charge more, stuff is more expensive. We're not here to do economics or anything like that, but my point is just, these are things that have happened, will continue to happen, and will almost certainly wind up coming out of a press release at Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro here in probably the next couple of years. If you can get a physical copy, you're probably better off with a physical copy.
What else do we have to say about this? Anything right now?
I think that covers pretty much most of it. The one thing that we did touch on that we haven't in this conversation is one of the big advantages that this brings, and I don't want us to downplay it, is the increase in accessibility that digital tools often bring to gaming spaces. Obviously, having lived through a pandemic, all of us are keenly aware of just how often games like this conversation are happening in multiple locations at once, thanks to digital telecommunications. And that means that people who might be homebound or might have compromised systems or other reasons why it's not necessarily super easy to just get up and go to the local game store, somebody else's house, et cetera, to be able to play. Additionally, those tools that we have been talking about can offer up books for digital readers so that you can have a voice tell you what's on the page if you are having trouble reading it otherwise. You can
increase the font size,
zoom in. All of those things are incredibly helpful when you're dealing with a 300-page book that is more encyclopedia than novel.
Searchable and bookmarked PDFs are a huge advantage.
Absolutely.
And yeah, there's always going to be, a cost associated with spending the time to edit the book to have those things in its PDF format. A lot of the editing costs are shared between a physical or a digital copy of a book because you're doing the same thing. You're editing the layout and making sure that the content is all there, it's all correct. You're not leaving out any please see page XX literally on the page rather than going back in and filling in the correct number for eventual publication. But I mean, yeah, it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it to make a PDF searchable, indexed, bookmarked, and yeah, though it has numerous advantages over physical media on things that we've talked about before. Yeah, the accessibility, the ability to back up a copy without buying another copy. I mean, yeah, they're great. And virtual tabletops as a service, screen sharing, Zoom meetings, Discord, these are all things that if we've, grown up in the internet age, we sometimes take them for granted. But I, for one, have been able to play with people I never would have even known existed because of things just like this video we're recording right now. Without the internet, I never would have met either of you.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Wouldn't have happened. Wouldn't have gotten to play games with anyone that I regularly now play games with, pandemic or otherwise. So yeah, of course there are great advantages to the internet, what it enables. We want to make sure that everyone watching this video also recognizes there are downsides and not everything that looks like progress is in your benefit.
One phrase that always jumps to mind with this is, if you are not paying money, you're not a customer, you're the product.
Mm-hmm.
We have gotten very used to using our data and other sorts of things to be the price we pay to get in and out of systems. And that's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that choice. It's only when that choice becomes unknowing that we run into real problems.
We're lucky that in this very much golden age of the hobby, we do have a choice on what to engage with. We don't have to play Dungeons and Dragons. Thanks to the OGL mess, there are at least 6 other games that I can think of right now that are already available, not to mention what's still coming, that you can play a fantasy RPG. And it's not a big stretch away from what you're used to. Some of them are going to be a big stretch away from what you're used to, and maybe that's a good thing. By all means, branch out, play more games. But even if you don't want to have to relearn everything, you can pick up a game that's very similar to what you're already used to and not be giving WotC money anymore to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes that choice can get taken away. When you no longer have the choice to engage, it's a less frequent problem, but those days are coming sometimes. How many times have you said, you know what, I'm going to get on Netflix, and I'm choosing Netflix because of a particular series that I want to watch, and they're the ones that have it. Right up until their license runs out and another company underbids them to show it on their channel. So now the content you went to Netflix for is on Hulu. What do? I guess you go buy Hulu. Good luck. Because it's going to move again eventually. And that, sure, you've always got the choice to just not engage with that show. And that keeps happening. Everything keeps getting bought. We don't have art anymore. It's all content. And someone owns the content. And someone wants to make money to let you engage with it at all. Not even live, not even currently, not even again, ever. Because that's just the system we live in, and we've somehow accepted.
And that's, of course, assuming that whatever it is that you want to watch goes to another service. Look at a number of shows on Max that simply will not exist in a format anyone can see them anymore. And while that is tax write-downs and everything else, and that's terrible, don't get me wrong. And as a consumer of media, that's definitely an issue. But it's also far from the only issue either. Like, there are hundreds of people that were involved in those shows that now may not have anything to show for it. And for people who are in the entertainment industry, they will tell you that most of them do not have like a steady gig that they're just working at this company and doing the same thing for over and over again. They're freelance workers. They move from job to job. A lot of their ability to get the next gig is based on how the previous one went. So if you can't show anyone any of the amazing costuming work you did on this period piece because HBO decided they're just never going to put it up on the internet in the first place, much less, take it up, put it down, or anything of that sort. What do you do with that? You just no, really, trust me, it was amazing. It was the greatest song in the world.
This is just a tribute.
Right. We run into all of these sorts of issues, and it is important to remember that as a consumer, there are definitely things that we don't like about it, but I promise there are also things that the people who made it are not happy about either. One last thing I want to mention before we wrap things up is I am privileged to be able to at least tertiarily know a number of people who work in the TTRPG industry. I don't know any of the big higher-ups, but I know a lot of the people that, quite frankly, if you are mad on the internet, probably dealing with them. Be kind to the people that are making the things that you love, because I assure you they are probably as keenly aware, if not more so, than you about just the sorts of shortfalls and shortcomings that their company is doing, and wish that they could do more to change it as well. It's not okay to be mad at an individual who isn't saving D&D single-handedly as though they were some sort of paladin taking the oath of content preservation. So when you are dealing with social media or anything else, know that there's a human behind that who is reading these messages and doing their best to represent the teams that they're a part of as best they can, while simultaneously also doing their job. We saw so much hate being directed at individuals who, frankly, do not have the ability to just we're just going to up and change how this works. That's not how any of these corporations work. Even the higher-ups at Wizards of the Coast who are overseeing Dungeons and Dragons directly are still answering to probably 3 or 4 levels of people above them who are telling them what they're going to need to do. And if that means that they're going to replace Chris Pine with Chris Pratt in the next D&D movie, then it's me, Chris, is going to be a thing we're going to have. And it's not something that they're going to have the ability to do anything about.
When it comes right down to it, anything at the scale of Dungeons and Dragons, the creator is usually not the final decision. Usually is not the final decision maker. on the product that ends up in your hands. Small indie press, pretty frequently, yeah, they are. Medium-sized companies, when you get to something like a Paizo, yeah, everyone at Paizo cares about the end product because they are making things they love. WotC, everyone at WotC could be the biggest fan of Dungeons and Dragons in the world. And they answer to people who just see it as a line item. And that's all.
Numbers go up. That is all there that so many people in the corporate world are looking at. And if your line is not going up as fast as they want it to, then you may not have a job anymore.
They'll make changes.
They'll make changes. So bear that in mind when you are dealing with people, when you are trying to, engage with these things. It is okay to be upset and frustrated and angry about the direction your favorite game is going, the things that people in charge are doing. We live in a capitalist hellscape. If you're not angry about most of this stuff, I question whether you're paying attention.
To quote in a different context, Michelle McNamara, it's chaos. Be kind.
Absolutely. And I think with that, we've basically covered everything we were looking to do.
Yep.
So I think we should probably call it here before we ramble on too far into other places.
Because we will.
We absolutely will. Trav, where can people find you on the internet to get more of these ramblings?
Where can they see me ramble? Right now, pretty much exclusively Bluesky. Occasionally you'll catch me as part of Yield Dragon's streaming crew playing, TTRPGs over on his Twitch channel. But yeah, anything I do, I'm eventually going to say about it on Sky because that's where I am these days.
And you can find me in most of the same places. I'm all over the internet at Stryk_Redkite, Bluesky. I'm still hanging out on the previous bird site, mostly just to play fiddle while Rome burns. I'm on Instagram. I don't really post on Instagram, but other people I like do, so sure. There's lots of stuff, is all I'm saying. You should come and find us, do things, and we will see you somewhere around the internet.
And if you, sorry, Mick, just one thing. If you did want to bring up questions about this, Stryk and I will be watching the comments when this goes on to Mickey. We will answer comments. Mickey, if you run into questions you want us to answer and we don't seem to.
Sounds good.
Absolutely. So, Mickey, where can we find you and all of your stuff?
If you're watching this video, you're probably very familiar with me. If you're not, hello, welcome in. I go by Music Kid for most parts of the internet. I stream 4 nights a week on Twitch, as well as 3 nights a week on TikTok. Mostly doing independent variety games. There will be a TTRPG coming out sometime this year from me. I'm still looking at the casting on that. But hopefully we will see most of you around the spaces. If you just Google that one Music Kid, I will be the first thing that pops up for everything. Other than Instagram, I'm still trying to get this 15-year-old kid to back down off of my handle, but he won't do it. So, other than Instagram and TikTok, you can find me at That One Music Kid. Those spaces, I'm thatonemusickid.ttv because branding consistency. But thank you again for coming and clicking through and watching this. Like they said, we'll be watching the comments for any questions. If this was a series you were interested in, we can continue talking more about TTRPGs in general. Let me know down below if that's something you'd like. Otherwise, hit the bell, do the thing, and I'll see you guys next week.
Smash that like button. Smash that subscribe button.